So Fred is our epidemiologist. Has been coming on the show for a year. It's just amazing. Actually more than a year, about 13 months, and so he's consults with states and nation states and all sorts of people. I'm sworn to secrecy on some of those, so I can't name them. But I don't even know where to begin. I mean, there's just so much every week. It seems like you think we're going to run out of material, but then more stuff comes along. So, what's the hottest thing concerning COVID and the pandemic right now?
Well, it's got to be Israel. I'm sorry, India, right? I mean, it's just a mess over there, and we're seeing what happens. When you can do a great job initially, like India did, and I did consult to India several months early on, and we shut down the state fairly early with them when we only had 500 infections, and then they got complacent, as a lot of countries have. And now, the best guess is that probably going to talk about almost a million, probably about a million people dying over the course of this summer.
Actually, I was watching a news report over the weekend. I've been tracking that, and they think that's being heavily underreported, and the numbers are probably 4 or 5 times higher. Even with the country with, I don't even know how much, 1.2 billion or some extraordinary number, 5 billion or 5 million dead, that would be an amazing number, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, the numbers could get as high as 2.5 million dead by the end of the year. And the underreporting has been 3 to 5 fold, according to international observers, on death, and between 10 and 13 fold on the number of cases overall,
Oh.
include the asymptomatic cases.
And you mentioned Israel, which is on the opposite side of the scale. They seem to have it together pretty well. And I wouldn't say it's normal again, but it's pretty darn close, right?
Yeah, they're doing well. They are in the middle of the Middle East, so it's important they start to spread some of those vaccines, to the Palestinians and to other groups. But right now they're at about 70% vaccination rates, and we're seeing a tremendous. I showed you that last week, the tremendous fall in vaccination and in overall infection levels, caseloads, death rates that have gone kind of down to the 1 in 100,000 rate that we like to see in order to control and really be able to contact trace and see and evaluate where we are with the disease. Right now, the U.S. is right around 13 per 100,000. Many states are getting in the 10 to 100,000, 10 in 100,000 new cases being reported, and some are down at close to 5. And at close to 5, at that point, you're starting to think that you can get toward normalcy, and those percentage numbers by state are dropping about 1% a day.
Hmm.
So that's a great sign that we're on our way. But of course, still we have less than half of the people in the United States fully vaccinated, and we're starting to see some changes in the data that are a little bit concerning. But I thought I'd talk about, if you're interested, Mike, I could
Oh,
talk a
yeah,
little
let
bit
me
about what the
just share my
alternative.
screen here. Hang on one second.
Yes, I've got a little bit to say. You've seen some of the data, but it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about why it's so important about this vaccination rate. And that's because we don't have many options. Oops, I think I might have the wrong one up here. Let me close that one down. Uh,
Yeah, last week we were talking about Michigan being unusually high compared to the rest of the country, but I think that rate is slowly ticking down.
It is. We are getting better. Some of the populations are still at pretty big risk, and I'll say a little bit about that in this show. I wanted to talk about the whole country rather than just Michigan, but I can certainly get into Michigan a little bit. So here's, gosh, it's already 5:10. Who would have believed? So on the country level, this was the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and you can see that we are down about 10 million jobs. We're officially down 8 million, 8.2 million fewer jobs. But if you add in what we thought we would be on a projection level from February, we would be down really 10 million. And this is really a challenge because you can see we went down in a big, V, and it came right back up again. But we've really been hovering around that 10 million mark now for a number of months. You can see kind of here we are at the turn of the year, and all the way through this turn of the year from where we're right at around, looking like we're slowly getting better, we're starting to go asymptotic to this line at around 8 million. And there's some reasons for that. The people are afraid to go back to work because they're afraid they're going to get or they're going to spread COVID-19. And so a lot of the people who are, especially in the services industries, are just saying, I don't want to go back to work and endanger my family. I'm living with people, or I want to visit people who are at risk, people who are immunocompromised, the elderly, who haven't been vaccinated, may not get vaccinated, or I might get it to the rest of my family. So they don't really want to go back to work. For that reason, there's a lack of childcare. And of course, right now, 40% of schools still have some form of closure. They're not fully open yet. So that's an issue. And it turns out that our economy has changed a little bit. And the idea that we now people have to have different skill sets. Working in a warehouse isn't the same as working in a factory. Working in and working online is not the same as working direct. And so they need to actually have different skills, and they have to train up for that. And I think you'll see in Biden's plan the opportunity to do some skilling. The problem is we're not very good at reskilling in the United States, especially among adult workers after they hit middle age. Our success there hasn't been very good. So hopefully there'll be enough. We've underfunded it a lot. So hopefully there'll be enough funding there to get people on the job path. And of course, the wages might be lower. You may have been let go from a job that was paying quite a bit. You need to have a certain amount to keep going, and so and the new jobs that are available aren't paying quite as much yet. Plus all these other additional factors. So we're seeing that line out now with fewer jobs, and that's why this vaccination piece is so important. And unfortunately, the vaccinations are starting to low down. I remember back on April 11th, we hit our peak. We were doing 3.6 million vaccinations a day and on an upward curve. And we have the capacity to do 5 million a day at that point if we wanted to, if we had enough supply. Well, now we have enough supply and we don't have enough demand. In fact, Illinois is sending back anything out of Chicago that they don't need. Iowa didn't want their vaccinations this week. Wisconsin didn't want their vaccines this week. And so, starting to see the end of the upward swing of vaccinations. And you can see that's despite the fact that only 43.8% of us are fully vaccinated. So that's pretty scary. And among the elderly who are really at the highest risk, you're at 3 times more risk of dying from the vaccine than younger. They're only 70% fully vaccinated, and that's really flattened out. We haven't been able to move that much at all. And we think we're going to flatten out at about 83% total, probably about 80% total.
We got a combination of anti-vaxxers, and then unfortunately, vaccine has become political for some reason that I've never quite understood. Not good.
Yeah, and most of the vaccines have been BioNTech, and Moderna. You can see J&J starting to come back into the groove a little bit because they're good at getting to places that are hard to get to generally. But it's mostly Pfizer, and it's going to probably be that way for the rest of the United States, and that's good for the state of Michigan, of course, because we make it here, finish it, we fill and finish here, so that's good. But at that rate of 2 million a day, and you can see we've only gotten, we still have 150 million more to go, people to go. That's 2 million a day. That's a lot. That's a lot of days left. We've got even if everyone stays at that level, and obviously the trend line is going way down. Yeah. And so you're right about this. The Democratic and Republican split, sort of interesting. I'll get to that in a second. The Kaiser Foundation had a huge survey that was just done. I cut a little bit of the Pfizer stuff here. One of the things I was wondering about is the wait and see versus the definitely. It turns out the wait and see are pretty evenly split among Democrats and Republicans, but the definitely only if required are really more Republicans than Democrats. But the wait and see, we have to really talk to everybody about the wait and see and get people more confident. We have to get them more access. And we have to fill in a lot of the gaps with people's knowledge about the vaccine. So for that 15% wait and see, because it turns out if we're at 79%, 64 plus 15, we're getting pretty close. We're getting pretty close to herd immunity. at 85, or if we think we need to at 85%. But right now, problem is we can't do our children. Anyone below 16 can't get a vaccine yet. And that'll change this week. May 12th, we've got the big review of the Pfizer 12 to 15-year-old study. Moderna will have it by the end of the month for the 12 to 17-year-old. So then we'll be able to do high school students basically by September. But probably the 6-month plus Pfizer Moderna tests won't be ready till January 1st of next year. You can see that we're talking about, even if you don't mandate and don't really push people hard, we're probably only going to level out at below 70%, and that will not be herd immunity, which means we're going to have to fight off the disease. And so then the question becomes, okay, so not everyone wants to get vaccinated. A lot of people will get the disease who aren't vaccinated. So what do we have to fight? And I'll get into a little bit of what our pipeline looks like. So part of the problem of not vaccinating children is, of course, today, children, which represent less than 20% of the population, are overrepresented now in the number of people with COVID. So you can imagine that without vaccines, how bad this thing would look, right? Because children are pretty, have a pretty good resistance to COVID to begin with. They are largely asymptomatic. Despite that, in Michigan, you see a 12% plus increase in the number of cases in children. And overall, we're overrepresenting that part of the population because we've got, of course, no one vaccinated in that part of the population. So those less vaccinated groups are really starting to show up in the statistics now. So the question is going to be, what does the rollout look like? Here's Pfizer's rollout. So on May 12th, that's on Wednesday, we're going to have the review. I'll listen in on the review. I'll let you know how it goes of the children. That's 12 to 15, and they're hoping to get EUA approval. And I don't see any problem with that. Children are a little bit trickier. They have different immune systems. 12, though, 12 to 15, more like adults than not. 0 to, 6 months to 12, that's when things get a little bit tricky, especially the 0 to 2-year-old dosing gets trickier. That's why those tests are going to have to be a little bit longer. But right now, no adverse events. Everyone was protected who got the vaccine by 100%. No bad adverse events beyond reactogenicity, and 100% protection from going to the hospital versus the placebo group where you had a lot more than that. That's May 12th. We'll hear that. We'll probably get an approval, hopefully, certainly before the end of the month, and possibly as early as end of next week. And then they have September 5 to 11, 2 to 5s will be submitted, and then they hope at the 6-month-old to 2-year EUA submission will be in November, with all ages then approved December. And they're also going to go, as you know, Mike, for not just EUA, but full licensure, which means that suddenly you can mandate full licensure. You can't mandate EUA. If you go in the military, they can't mandate that. But once they get to full licensure, that's when mandates become of question. And you can see your point with Democrats are supporting vaccines in schools by double the margin of Republicans. And I don't know why that is. I can't figure that out. But it's definitely statistically significant. The other big thing is that a lot of, you can talk about Democrats and Republicans, but the truth is that everyone's a little bit hesitant. Everyone wants to sort of wait and see. And so we can see that, for themselves on this part, 64%, 15, 19, right? We can see that 19% saying never for both groups, but the wait and see for kids is up at 47%. Wait and see for adults is only at 15%. So it's triple the wait and see level for the kids is triple that of adults. And so I think we're gonna, it's gonna be a little bit slower to get everyone vaccinated. And you can see the requirement. The reason I put that in is because I don't think we're gonna be able to even talk about herd immunity and protection of populations if we don't have some sort of mandate in many schools. And that's that's a political issue, obviously, but it looks like we're going to have challenges in September about going back to school, about with the economy, and about infection rates breaking out in schools, especially in sports where people are exhaling a lot, and where kids are pretty tight together, and in unventilated areas. My guess is that September, October, November, not too bad, but at November, December, things are going to get bad. Families get back together for Thanksgiving again. The younger generation spreads it to the older generations, especially around Christmas and Thanksgiving. And so there, I think we're going to start to see some challenges, especially if we have variant issues that we talked about in the past as well. So that's what things look like. And what's interesting is that people keep talking about the fact that we have to add in the natural infection rates. Well, it turns out natural infections are a lot messier than injections. Injections and the vaccines are very focused, and you can see this is a logarithmic scale. This is from participants in Israel. So they looked at people who had been infected, waited for 3 months, and then after infection, what happened? So they actually looked and said, okay, they have a very good testing program in Israel. And they said, okay, after they were infected, you can see that basically they moved from about 60, in the area of 64 neutralizing antibodies titer to up to, kind of the 300 level, 400 level. But after they had the vaccine, and this is against the original virus, they went up to 16,000. So, huge numbers, right? From 80 to 450, that's a 5-fold increase. 80 to 9,000, that's a 12-fold increase. And again, you see the same thing with the variants. It's not nearly as strong, right? You got only your vaccination. Before vaccination levels, you're just barely at protective level. That dotted line is the limit of detection, by the way, and so that means that we went from 40 to 250 instead of from 80 to 450. So it's still 5-fold, but the overall level of protection isn't nearly as good. But when you have the vaccine, it's almost 8,000 to 9,000. That's in the same statistical range. So that's significant. The amount of protection you get with the variants really makes a difference. Now there are more difficult variants, the 1351 and the P1. And you can see for the B1351, if you got infected, you can get reinfected really fast. And that was happening in Brazil and in South Africa. People would get infected with the virus. They think, I'm safe now. And they get reinfected almost immediately again. And that same thing with the P1 variant in Brazil. So if we can't count on the natural thing, being natural and just letting ourselves get infected, and then suddenly, being protected. You won't be protected as well. You won't be protected for as long, and you also will still be able to transmit much more effectively than people who have the vaccine. The vaccine, your transmission rates go down 50%. Natural infections, less so, and you're also not protected for nearly as long. Natural protections disappear 4 to 8 months after you've been infected. So people who've been infected, last year already are probably fairly susceptible to the next disease. So the question becomes, right? Okay, so people don't want to get vaccinated. What else is out there? And the answer is lots is being tested. So let's take a look at this, right? 50% of all the new drugs originated in the United States, so we're leading in innovation, which is great. You can see that most of the opportunity is in treatments. That means that after you've gotten the disease and you want to start to treat the symptoms of the disease, over those are immune systems, those are cardiovascular impacts, those are lung impacts, those are neural impacts, kidney impacts. It hits the whole body, as you know, because it hits the ACE2 receptor, and all organs have an ACE2 receptor, so all organs can be infected. So they have lots of treatment options, but most of these treatment options are largely pre-existing. 90% of them are already on the market for something else. So, chances are you're going to get something that isn't really designed for COVID, but has been redirected. And hopefully it'll work for you. Very few approvals in this space. Antivirals here, 37% were pre-existing. That means they weren't really designed for COVID directly. They may have been designed for HIV. They may have been designed for other viruses, but not for COVID. But 60% are almost 70% are brand new for COVID specifically. We'll go into some of those. And then the vaccines are all, as you know, very new, very modern, and that's our best option. But some people don't want to take it, so here's what they have to offer for them. You can see that right now we have 4 antivirals, we've got 3 vaccines, and 1 treatment. That's it. That's what's been approved for COVID in the United States right now. 8 things. So although we've got 939 programs, we have 8 that have been approved. And the rest of the world, you know, since we do about 50% of the innovative stuff, 14 things have been approved, and there is some overlap. Late stage clinical, we've got 100 things in development. Generally, of those 100, it'll take about 1.5 years for them to come out into market, and about 90% of them will fail. So we may have another 10 things in about a year or 2. And you can see we have, you know, some failures as well. So that's sort of what we have coming out. So if you don't want to take a vaccine and you get sick, not many options, just so people are aware. And here are the top strategies, right? The first big one is the antibodies. So we'll go into antibodies in some detail, talk a little bit about Lilly, but there's one from Regeneron as well. They're quite similar. I happen to like the Regeneron one slightly better from the clinical trial data, but and also for variants. Then you have the protein-based vaccines. We have no protein-based vaccines in the market yet. The first one will come out probably from Novavax in about a month and a half. Then we've got the anti-inflammatories, and those are all the things that are supposed to suppress your immune system like dexamethasone does, which is a really big lifesaver, so that you don't overreact to getting infected and basically kill yourself by your own immune system. And the anti-inflammatory, that's the same kind of effect, miscellaneous. Then we've got the antivirals. That actually will go into some work as well, looking at actual antiviral drugs that are out there. Then we have a whole bunch of things that are basically treatments once you have it that aren't directly against the virus, but against all the bad things that happen to the rest of your body. Those are immune stimulators, pulmonary function, the anti-inflammatories, the vasodilators, the anticoagulants, and the cardiorenal function drugs, for example, and the gastrointestinal drugs. So those are those drugs, and then we've got the vaccines, some of the remaining vaccines, quite a few going on there. And you can see that RNA-based vaccines, we've got 28 of those. Those are our primary, those are what we are primarily going after right now using Pfizer, and we have on the market with Pfizer and Moderna. So that's sort of what the whole pipeline looks like when you break out the 939 programs. So let's take a look at monoclonal antibodies. So here, you have to take a monoclonal antibody fast. The point of all these treatments is you have to take them very early on in the infection, or by the time you get to them, the virus has already taken over your body. So if you can't get to monoclonal antibodies within 10 days, and you don't generally know that you've been infected for about 4 of those days, if by day 4 or 5 after feeling not so great, you're still not in the hospital, because these are non-hospital drugs, not administered in the hospital generally, then you can drive yourself to an infusion site, and they'll infuse you for it'll take about 2 hours, about 20 minutes to the infusion, about another hour and a half for observation, make sure you're okay. And then you'll have some protectants against the antibody. Now you can see, compared to the vaccine, these are not nearly as effective as the vaccine curves. I don't know if you remember the vaccine curves, but the vaccine curves really showed a huge deviation between the end state of not being vaccinated and vaccinated. That difference would have been, that placebo line that you see, it's in orange, that would be at -0.5, and the vaccine would have been at -5, right? So that's the gap that you would have had in most vaccines, right? Versus here, the gap is 3.25 and 4.5. And that's a gap that doesn't deal with death, it deals with viral load. So the difference in the studies here, in the clinical studies, if you're talking about a vaccine, then you're talking about something that would have been placebo. And you see my cursor? Here, it would have ended up here, right here, versus being down here, right? The blue line would have been down ending here, and the orange line would have ended here. Now that would have been on a time of about 40 days, versus here you're talking about a fairly fast improvement over 11 days. But again, you're only talking about the difference between about 3.5 and 4 point and about 4.2. But it is effective. And I would, if you are feeling bad and you haven't had the vaccine and you know you've got COVID, get yourself to an infusion facility and take these drugs. You can see the difference between taking them separately, or one versus two. And what happened was Lilly came out with one monoclonal antibody. Whoops. And they eventually moved to two, which have slightly different impact on the bad virus coming toward it, because it just wasn't as effective. Two was much more effective than one. Now, the nice thing about the end point here is about viral load. It's not about death. So, you can see that there is a reduction. And what's nice is that basically the reduction, you've got a 1.6% chance of being hospitalized versus a 6% chance. So you have a 5-fold reduction in the chance of being hospitalized after you've taken these drugs, which is nice.
Now, these antibody clinics, are they just drop in? You think you're sick, you just show up, or what?
Yeah, and I'll give you a website where you can just go ahead and sign yourself up. Lilly has one website. Regeneron has another website. There's no centralized place, sadly. If you talk to like CVS Caremark or Walgreens, they also have infusion facilities all over the country, and I'll show you that in a second. So here's what they showed. The portion of deaths. Now this costs, the vaccine costs about $18 a dose. This costs about $1,200 a dose. Not nearly as effective. And then you have to pay also for the infusion. Now you don't have to pay anything because the government wants to help you here, so it won't cost you anything, but it will cost the government about $2,000.
Wow.
Instead of $18 for a vaccine. So it's a lot less effective, costs a lot more, and you've got to be right on top of it very rapidly for it to be effective within a 10-day period. You can see the viral load change from 3, 5, and 7 days beyond. So that's how this looks. And what's nice about this is it doesn't have that many side effects, but don't forget the side effects in vaccines were between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in a million, and here you're talking about 1 in 100. So again, you'll have there's a chance you're going to have a little bit more of a reaction to this than you would have had with a vaccine. So this is probably the best option you've got as a first-line therapy if you're not going to take a vaccine and you do come down with COVID. And it gives you a sense of, it costs about 100 times more. It's about 10 times less effective. You have to know exactly what you're doing right away. You've got to drive yourself to an infusion facility and take a couple hours to do that. And it does have about 10 to 100 times level of side effects as a vaccine. So
your better bet is get the vaccine.
Your better bet is, yeah, and there are other reasons people won't take the vaccine. They may be immunocompromised and they're concerned about the vaccine. They may have conditions that cause them not, to be worried about the vaccine. So there are reasons that people don't want to take that, and sometimes people are just uncomfortable with vaccines generally, and so but here's an option for you if you don't take the vaccine. And generally, if you're considered a high-risk patient, and a third of us are obese, about 14% of us have diabetes, many of us have chronic kidney disease, or if we're taking a medication that weakens the immune system, and that's about 14% of the population today. So you're talking about probably half the population that's going to be eligible to have infusion. Doesn't cost anything, but make sure you catch it early. Otherwise, it's not as good, as if you take it, on day 10, for example. Earlier the better. Get in front of the vaccine virus. Here's where you can find So just I can send this. I'll put it on the website if you're interested. You just put in your address, and it'll say here's your closest infusion site, and um, then of course, all the costs are no costs.
Hmm.
But we have paid $1,000 a dose as taxpayers, as well as $750 a dose for reimbursing the facility. So it isn't free, but luckily, it doesn't cost anything for us. So that's the biggest opportunity you've got for a non-vaccine. Now let's talk about the antivirals. And you can see that there are different kinds of ways we work on new drugs. One is to say it's repurposed. And that means that you had a drug for, say, the Ebola virus, and you decided to repurpose it as is for COVID, and that did happen for a whole bunch of drugs. You can see not so much for vaccines, but certainly for treatments, and less so for antivirals, because the antivirals need to be a little bit more specific. The redirected ones, though, that means that you had something in the clinic, and you said, this COVID stuff looks so much more interesting, so much better than what we were originally going for. That let's redirect our phase 3 clinical trials into a new opportunity, or phase 2 or phase 1 or even preclinical. So these are going to take a lot long. The redirected are going to take a lot longer than the repurposed. The repurposed are already on the market. You can use them off label. You may not get reimbursed, but you'll be able to pay for them and access them. The redirected you won't be able to get until they've been approved for something. And then the new for COVID-19, you can see that for the antivirals actually try to block the virus directly. There you need to have something pretty new. The treatments, there are not so many new things available just for COVID. That probably makes sense. Most of these things are respiratory diseases that are common, cardiovascular diseases that are issues, especially the myocardial issues. CNS issues are similar. So they don't have that many new treatments, which means that you're treating a lot of the symptoms and the other organs involved post-infection. And almost all the vaccines are brand new because they got to be very, very specific. So that's
is there any carryover from the SARS? I know SARS was somewhat related.
That's right. That in fact, one of the repurposed ones. So the 2% of the vaccines, one of them was for SARS, one of them was for MERS, and one of them was for Ebola. Mm-hmm. So that's that gives you a sense where they are. So here's the pipeline. You can see that we're really interested. The EUAs, we got 8 and 14, as I said. Eight are approved on emergency use only basis in the United States. You can see that we're failing at about a 10-fold ratio. So 106 were applied for, and 8 went through trials, and they decided we're going to give up. Doesn't look effective. So about 90% failure rate, which is typical, and we still have though almost over 820 or so that are active either preclinically or clinically. The preclinical, as you know, means it's before it gets into human beings. So here you're still testing animals, you're still looking at the petri dish, you're not looking at humans. Once it gets into the clinical means you're actually you're actually trying this thing out in humans. And there are 3 phases of clinical trial. The first phase really deals just with safety. Is it safe? You take healthy people and you give them the drug, and if they don't have adverse events, then it's considered safe to then go ahead and try to treat people who are sick. Phase 2 trials tend to look at modes of action. So you're trying to find out how this thing works in humans, and you're trying to figure out a dose. And once you have a dose and you know how it works, then you can go to the FDA. So we really like to try a lot of patients and compare them against against the best available other treatments, or against a placebo group to see if we have people surviving longer. And that's the phase 3 trials, and those are the most expensive ones and take the longest period of time. So the active clinical means you're either in phase 1, 2, or 3. The active preclinical means it's before you have actually gotten into human beings. And so you can see how it really starts to winnow out very, very rapidly in terms of what you've got active clinically and what's actually been approved versus the 939 we've got in trial. So. Here is what the 8 look like. The antivirals, we've got 3 approved in the EUA status in the antiviral space. Remdesivir, which blocks the virus's ability to actually reproduce once it gets into the cell. So it's an antiviral. And then we have Regeneron, which and the others are all monoclonal antibodies, which you talked about before. And we talked about bamlanivimab and estivanimab. Those are the two Lilly, I should have, drugs. And then we have the convalescent plasma. That's spun down, that's blood that's spun down for people who are sick and that have very high titers, a lot of antibodies against the virus. You spin it down until you just have the antibodies. They're polyclonal, they're not monoclonal. There are multiple kinds of antibodies in there, and there's a number of companies who can do that. Basically, spin down blood of people who are sick and give it to you. Problem is, we're finding that's not terribly effective. Especially after day 3, 4, 5 of being sick. Basically, the convalescent plasma, it's 50-50 whether it really impacts you much at all. And then these are the treatments. You can see all in the anti-inflammatory area. These are mostly steroids. Dexamethasone is our gold standard here. We actually did that testing in Britain and moved it over. And then Roche has Toci, which is another monoclonal antibody, especially designed to avoid cytokine storms. So that's what we've got. That's all we have. So people should be aware. Once you get by the vaccine, you got 4 vaccines available, or I'm sorry, 3 vaccines available. A couple more coming. That's and then we've got 8 other things that convalescent plasma we don't think works very well. We've got a couple things that work at about a tenth the efficacy of the vaccines, and then we've got stuff to treat you after you've gotten really sick to save your life, but it doesn't affect the virus at all. That's it.
So when we get past the emergency use authorization, I guess Pfizer's, you said, it's coming up on Wednesday.
No, the emergency use for they're going to file for licensure now. And they think that licensure will probably be approved by July. Remember, you got to go through all of the data. So that's a lot of people who've been vaccinated. So that's going to be a full FDA review. The emergency use review, that's going to be just for children between the ages of, they have already got approval for 16 to 85. And now they want to have, they have data now and have submitted the data and will be reviewed on Wednesday for children between the ages of 12 and 15. So that,
all right. So, but the one on Wednesday, then we won't see the FDA say yay or nay until July, right? Where it'll be certified as non-emergency, right?
No, we'll probably hear by the end of the week to early next week that yes, we can inject children with the vaccine from the age of from the Pfizer vaccine from the age of. Oops, let me go back to that slide here. We are. Right here. Okay. So today you can do 16 to 18-year-olds. On May 15th, you can do 12 to 16-year-olds. By June 1st, you can use Moderna for 12 to 17-year-olds. That covers you from 12 all the way to 85, likely around June 1st. That means the high school students will likely be vaccinated by September who want to get vaccinated. And then the 6-month plus will be January 1st. That's all under EUA. The licensure request will be submitted this month for both companies, both Moderna and Pfizer, and will probably be approved in about, 4 weeks if 50 is really fast, and 6 weeks if it goes just fast.
So we get back to July. The reason I'm bringing that point up, I saw a special where a lot of the soldiers, for instance, said they weren't going to take the vaccine as long as it was emergency use. It had to be licensed before then it becomes mandatory, right?
About 40%. We talked about that last week. About 40% of soldiers are rejecting it.
Yeah, right.
And of course, they're having a lot of trouble controlling COVID as a result.
Right.
So, like I said, we moved from about 900 total programs to 71 clinical stage. So of the 900, 239 are antivirals. These actually combat the virus directly. And we've got MAB, monoclonal antibodies, and polyclonal antibodies, cell therapies. Then we have tier 1 COVID interior targets. Those are actually targeting the reproductive capability of COVID after it enters the cell. Then we have tier 2, which is the host is targeting viral entry and assembly. So that's actually blocking and competing for blocking on the ACE2 receptor. Then we've got the host target viral traffic and packaging that's entering the cell. And then we have non-COVID viral targets. There are just a few of those because you have to be pretty specific here for the virus itself. And then we have miscellaneous host-directed antivirals. Again, not as specific to COVID as you'd like. The tier 1 are the ones to watch for. And you can see there are not that many of those. There are 5 of the 239 programs. And those, and the 5 that to watch for are the Ridgeback. These are actually specific genomic targets that target proteases and replicating enzymes, like we have for HIV. So, we've got cocktails for HIV that actually, stop the reproduction of the virus. And that's what we're working for here. Ridgeback and Merck are far along. Roche, the AT527 are far along. These are nice oral therapies. You don't have to go and get injected. If injections are worrying you, you take it, but you have to take it early. And then you've got the cholesterol inhibitor binding. COVID has one that's a specific protease binder here. That looks good as well. They started on February 2nd into the clinic, which looked pretty interesting. So those 4 or 5 companies are all you've got to choose from. And those guys are probably, 6 months away from an EUA and, probably another year and a half away beyond that for getting general licensure in the United States. And then we've got tier 2, which do general disruption of entry and replication against human spike protein, the binding of the ACE2 inhibitor. And those are less effective because they only compete against the virus for a binding site. The COVID interior targets actually hurt the virus once it enters the cell, but you have to let it enter the cell, and so you're further down the infection curve than a tier 2 does. So if you can get to a tier 2 early enough, that's helpful. The problem is, as you know, we talk about this all the time, we don't test enough, so we don't know who has the virus, where it's likely to pop up, where they got it from, and we don't know whether it's for a difficult variant or not. And all those that really hurts our ability to treat using these kinds of drugs.
Okay. All right. So, we have come a long ways. It was just a few months back where you couldn't find a place to get vaccinated, and now you can walk into a drugstore and get vaccinated. So, we've made a lot of progress.
A lot easier. Here, by the way, are the treatment. These are treatments after you've gotten the disease or during late stages of the disease, not for the virus itself, but for all the things that it does to you. At the immune system level, at the anti-inflammatory level, at the steroid level. You can get vasodilators to make sure that you can still, your heart isn't as badly affected, anticoagulants, again, to prevent all this coagulation that's occurring and killing people, and the pulmonary function and lung function. That gives you a sense of the 336, only 59 are in early phase 3 clinical trials. They're a year away, just generally. And that's what it looks like, Mike. That's our whole pipeline. So if you don't want to take a vaccine, there are some things for you, but they're just not as effective, especially in transmission prevention, and which we know now vaccines are helping us do, and for prevention of death.
Okay.
Additional 4-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.